talking about respect for time and the amount of time that a reader has to engage with the writing, and so cutting sentences down. Does that relate to the short story for you, and the struggles of, I know you've written longer things,
Yes.
And clearly have a novel, but does the short story do that more effectively? Because obviously there's less time to read.
I think it does for me. And what I found was when I started applying these principles, that again, that I've kind of cartooned out a little bit, but this principle of shrink wrapping is how I think of it. Often I would have a novel that would just get shrunk down to a story. And so my working hypothesis is, for my particular psychology, anything I write, I have to look very much askance at any tendency to bloat. I always say my stories are like those wind-up toys. You wind them up, put it on the floor, it goes under the couch as quickly as possible. That, somehow my work thrives under that kind of mindset. If I start thinking, oh, let me unpack this, basically the energy of the prose goes down. So yes, I mean, I had that Mexico novel was one, and then throughout the years there were 2 or 3 stories that I thought, maybe this is the one. But by now I've learned to, if I say maybe this is a novel, it means it isn't. And with this Lincoln book, which, my wife argues it's not really a novel because there's so much white space in it, but I think something like that, I really sort of took up a stance toward the book to say, please don't joke, don't be a novel unless you really, really have to. And it said, okay, I will. And so in that sense, you're a bit like a bouncer at the gate saying, I know that my stuff doesn't come alive unless it's compressed, so let's not kid ourselves. And so far the story almost reliably has been the form that I understand. It's like a joke, that I can kind of understand.
All right, I have 2 questions and I think might be related. So you said you can feel when you're in that unmediated state. But do you ever have the experience that you begin writing not in that state and then you somehow transition into that state through writing?
Yes.
And then let me ask my second question because I think you might see a way in which they're related. It's really stunning to me that is the state that you want to be in, that nebulous state, and yet you do these incredible revisions, 400 pages on the same story. And I just wonder, it seems more achievable in sort of the first take where it's all fresh to you and surprising to you. But when you come back to it, do you have techniques or ways that you sort of make that material new to you so you can continue to revisit and not get attached to it, I guess is really what I'm saying.
That's the million-dollar question. And I'll say the honest and not flashy answer is that's the one thing that's improved over the years is when you're young and you write something and it's good forever. The coffee stain is perfect and everything, But I think what happens is you just aren't able to, since that meter I talked about has got fog on it, you can't really see your reaction. So over the years what's happened is less time has to pass between reads. And so I can do now, at least when I was writing Lincoln book, I could do 3 good, clean reads a day with just a little space between. When I was younger, it would take a week, So that has actually come down. And I think it does have to do a little bit with kind of, again, this is the metaphorical way, you become aware that such a meter exists and that you're capable of discerning it. Then the fog clears and you're like, oh, I actually am having a reaction in every line to my work. I just didn't see it before. That improves. So, and also, part of it is to say, I'm probably wrong today. I'll go through and make revisions on Wednesday. 50% of them will be reversed later. But to kind of go, okay, that's all right. I'm only writing on Wednesday. I'll have Thursday, Friday, Saturday to fix it. And then once you've gone through this process a few times and felt the benefits, then you become very trusting in that, the willingness to believe in your temporary reaction, because eventually you'll fix it. And yes, and the other thing that I'll mention, it's again, this is kind of like almost like a UFO kind of thing, but there's a phenomenon I've observed where, let's say a story ends up taking 5 years to get finished. Often there'll be something I write in the first month or 2, a little nugget, like a bit, and it doesn't go there. It's on page 3, and it makes a bit of a structural goiter. It just feels, when you hit it, the energy drops, and that doesn't belong there. Juno Diaz said one time when he was writing the stories in Drown, he used to dream of them as kind of like colored shapes, and he would see a beautiful flowing blue, red, yellow, and there'd be a ugly clump of something on it. And when he woke up, he knew which section of the story that was, and he'd take it out. So you'll have a section that doesn't go there. Sometimes for logical reasons, it's explaining something that hasn't been asked yet, answering a question that hasn't been asked. So what I've learned at this point is, even though it's good, if it's not correct, you pluck it out. And I put it in a file, outtake file, leave there. Then 5 years later, I'm about to finish the story, and the question that bit answers gets asked at a very organic place in the story. Oh, I wish I had a section to describe Leonard's early years in Cleveland. You go, oh, I do have that. You go to the outtake file, it pops right into this place on page 28 seamlessly. And not only that, it then raises a question that gets answered in the next paragraph. So I think what the model I've made to explain this is that essentially a story exists perfectly in whatever you want to call it, the subconscious or some other place. When we go to tell it, we drop it, and it hits the table and shatters. Revision is basically the process of piecing that artifact back together. Now, I don't know what that actually means in a neurological sense, but experientially, I know it to be the case. And again, when you've had an experience like that over and over, you start to have a kind of quiet trust that the story will answer your question. Stuart Dybek, the great Chicago writer, says the story is always talking to you. You just have to learn to listen to it. So this is the other thing over the years. I have less anxiety about stories because what I found is if you hit an obstruction, and we go back to the Einstein quote, no worthy problem is ever solved in the plane of its original conception. An obstruction that when you were younger you would have understood as a fatal blow to your story, and maybe to you, the obstruction is the story saying, I refuse to be solved in the plane of your original conception. Now, at that point, again, I can never solve that rationally, but I can note it and say, okay, my story is knotted up right now. It seems completely impossible to solve. Good. That means, the Houdini is in even deeper water with stronger handcuffs. And if you have that, and so over the years, I got this kind of quiet faith that any story can be solved, and paradoxically, to relax into that will hasten the process in a certain way. Like I say, it's nebulous, but.
Thank you very much. I teach Christian ethics, and so I write nonfiction.
Oh, there.
Hi,
Sorry.
sorry. I haven't ever written fiction, but I've been thinking a lot about writing as an ethicist and how you get into the same traps of it has to be conceptually rigorous, and this is the map, and this is what the reader needs to understand, and similar blocks can come up in that vein. And I'm also part of an op-ed project trying to learn to write for more public audiences and also just quickly. So I thought, and I don't think I've ever conversed with my text the way you do, and so I've thought about that too. Like what is it saying to me? What wants to play? What can I have fun with? Even though I'm doing ethical stuff that's always feels like,
Yeah.
everything is so messed up. So I just want to thank you for that, but I also just wonder how not to spend years because it happens often with academics that we hold on to things too long and we don't just let it go.
I haven't found, the only thing I found is that sometimes if I'm in the story realm, I have to take as long as it forces me to take, but sometimes there's a side benefit. If I'm from focusing on fiction with this obsessive thing, sometimes other pieces will come more easily, So I think this conversing with your own story is a nice way to say it, because first of all, when a story gives you a problem, there really isn't such a thing as a problem. There's if you get to a place in a story where there's a problem, what it means is you've made a very, very nice Houdini moment for yourself. You've made a place where the stakes have risen, and you've been so honest up to that point that there's no easy sort of facile escape. You really don't know how to get out of it. That means that the ethical questions you're raising are profound. They're not easily answered. So I think to turn to yourself and say, let's assume that when I get obstructed in a work of art or an essay, that's good. The unobstructed work is the facile one. the one that proves an easy propagandistic point never gets obstructed. But when, I can give you an example of how stories can work. I think a story essentially is a system of ambiguity that resists easy solutions. So for example, there's a beautiful Chekhov story called Gooseberries. I don't know if you know it, but it's essentially, I mean, seems like a kind of wandering anecdotal story. These friends go on a hunting trip and they kind of batten down for the evening and exchange stories about life. But really what it is, it's a meditation on happiness, I think. That's how I read it. So early on, there's a guy who hasn't bathed in a long time, and he goes into a pond, and there's this rapturous scene of him floating around, just going, oh God, just pleasure. And there's a description of this beautiful serving girl who's so beautiful that when she comes in, all the people just stop and look at her. A lot of kind of service to the idea that life is full of beauty and happiness. At the end, one of the guys is telling a story, and he lurches over into the pedantic, and he says, he said, happiness is actually a bourgeois indulgence. Every time you're happy, you're making someone over there unhappy. Happiness is a form of privileged masturbation, in a sense. He says, every happy man should have an unhappy man in his closet with a hammer to remind him by his constant tapping that not everyone is happy, So the story works as it says, happiness is absolutely indefensible. Happiness is absolutely essential to our existence. And Chekhov, the reader says, which one is it, Anton? And he says, yes, thank you very much, and he backs out. So I think that, we can acknowledge our own obstructions. Sometimes even in the text, the acknowledgement of the obstruction is a structural move. I'm not maybe going off into inside baseball, but if you write yourself in a place where you go, the problem with this piece is X, and you make the next sentence in your piece, the problem with my piece so far is X, then you'll be on the way to solving it. Again, intuitive. There are times when it just has to be edited. There's something where, the pages behind me, page 1, 2, 3, when those become real to me, they've actually happened. They spring off the page and into reality. They're not words, but then I'm good. Then I move forward. So sometimes you'll get, if I have a story that's a big mess in the middle, then I'll just revise it all day. And mechanically, you're just putting the stuff in my hand, entering it, printing it out, and then rinse, lather, repeat. And the leap of faith is to say that is actually writing. You don't know what you think all day. And even when you leave that day, you still don't know what you think of the piece. Leaving that box open, I think, is the fruitful thing.
Hi. At the beginning of your talk, you spoke about that pivotal moment as a writer where you embraced being a writer as allow me to please you. Mm-hmm. Toward the end of the talk, you spoke about this, maybe the goal or the idealized experience of the reader as being buffeted by the story. And I'd just be interested to hear you reflect on those together, how the buffeting is a kind of pleasing or being pleased.
Yes, I think it is. I think it's the highest form of being pleased. And again, buffeting is the induction of that state of ambiguity I just talked about, where the two of us have gone on a journey to explore happiness or whatever we explore. I've never condescended to you once. So through that mutual respect, we ascend the ladder. We leave behind all the easy ways of thinking about happiness, the facile ways of thinking about happiness. We get up to the crux of the issue. And instead of weighing in, we say, thus it is. And then for me, the fiction I love, you get to that moment where you say, thus it is. You're more confused than when you went in, but you're confused in a more substantial way. What happens is all the easy solutions that you rely on every day are gone. You're in that holy state of confusion. You look at the lake. Damn, it's more of a lake than it was 10 minutes ago, So also in nonfiction, that's something I've noticed is you go in, the pieces I've done have been well compensated. And so as a working class person, I'm like, oh my God, they're going to pay me that much. I better figure it out before I go. So I'm going to Dubai. I should know what I think. So then you go to Dubai to collect data to populate your pre-existing story. Then the first 2 days are great because the world destroys your conceptualization. And you have a panic because now you still owe them 12,000 words. Their money is still in your bank, and you have no idea. And that's the best, because then, in that state, your concepts are lower and your data collection is incredibly efficient. You're not screening to see if the data fits your version. You're just, let's say it again, let me write it down. Then towards the end, there's a really euphoric moment where every solution or take on the material you've proposed during it has also been ripped apart. I had a beautiful moment. I did a piece where I drove the Mexican border from Texas to California, went into Mexico and out, sat with those Minutemen, the militia, all this beautiful stuff. And I had, at the last day, I took a 5-mile walk. You can go from a parking lot to the place where the border runs into the sea, San Diego on one side. And so I got out there, and there was no border. There was just a really crummy fence that went about 6 feet into the ocean and just stopped. And on the Mexican side, they're having a big party, and the American side there's nobody. It's very sort of sterile and controlled. I'm like, wow, I could just go to Mexico. And I just walked through the fence, and it was in Mexico. Hi, how are you? Come back. And I thought, that's crazy. All this talk about the border, and nobody even cares. So then I'm walking back along the beach, and like in a Marlboro commercial, these 2 guys on horseback come down the hill. Beautiful Border Patrol guys. And there was a redhead kid and a beautiful gay Filipino American guy. Hi, sir. Hi. So you're in Mexico? I said, yeah. Well, we could actually arrest you, take you to the next border crossing, and then you'd have to find your way back. I said, yeah. He said, we're not going to do that, though. Why'd you do that? So I told him I was writing the story on the border. And he said, what are your conclusions? I ran my conclusions by, and in tag team, they tore down every half-assed notion I had was torn down in 5 minutes. And I was standing there with my story torn to shreds. And, well, have a nice day. And they rode off. But that walk back was one of the most beautiful moments of my life, because I had nothing. Except then you realize you have everything. Because if you could reenact the process by which you were stripped down to nothing, that would be a beautiful story.
Hi.
Hi.
I love how you talk about revision, and I'm totally with you. I'm a fiction writer also, and I think you could spend your whole life probably writing the same work, like painting over the same painting. So I agree with you completely. I'm wondering, though, I had this conversation a long time ago with a poet, and we were talking about revision, and I was saying a less elegant version of what you're saying. And he said, yes, but you can revise too much. You can over-polish a thing. And that was basically his idea. And I've been thinking about that ever since and trying to understand it. I don't think I've ever polished anything too much. I think everything needs way more work. But is that a concept that you understand? And how would that work, and how would you measure it?
Yeah, I think you definitely can do that. I can do that. But if you understand revision in the biggest sense, it would also include the moment when you went, oh God, I cut too much. So revision is boundless. And with what I do, and maybe part of it is also to recognize the symptoms in your work of over-revision. So for me, it means I tend to get too logical. That inner nun takes over, and all the whimsy or the humor gets cut out. So I know that feeling very well. It's just a feeling of the fun going out of it, and it's certainly linear and efficient, but it's not pleasurable. And again, I trace this back to one particular moment. I had a story called Pastoralia that I'd been working on for a long time. And it has a lot of corporate speeches that come by fax or something from the boss. And they're not logically essential to the plot, but they're fun. And so we had a tuition bill due, and I needed to sell that to the New Yorker. So I thought, I'm going to put on my supervising cape and cut it down to a manageable length. And I did, and it logically worked. Gave it to my wife, and she said, you took all the fun out of it. Why does anybody want to read this? So part of the model would be, yes, efficiency, but efficiency broadly defined to include relief from efficiency. So this is the thing. I think the one thing I really believe in is that in writing, well, maybe in everything, we long to go on autopilot. You know, it's so uncomfortable to constantly be redeciding things every minute of the day. But I think that's the game. So for me to say, as I've just said, revise endlessly, that can also become a kind of autopilot, you know. So unfortunately, we have to constantly to me, watching the meter is a good way. If you over-revise, it'll actually drop into the negative.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much
Thank you.
for your talk. Let's give George another hand.
And